So I would like to invite our next speaker up. Judy Newton is the National Lead and a Consultant Nurse for MND here in Scotland. Judy.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Scotland. It's a great privilege to be here and to be one of the first speakers, but also to represent the Scottish MND team who are sitting clustered over. Everybody's going to give you a little wave. But you're very welcome to Scotland, and unfortunately I think there's maybe going to be a bit of bad Scottish weather over the next couple of days, but there we have it. I'd also just like to thank Colin very much for coming up and speaking first off. That's a hard act to follow, Colin, but you've a great inspiration not only to me, I know also to Diane, who is part of your care, but you've also been exceptionally willing to help in everything that we've thrown at you. So thank you very much, because it's the investment from people living with MND that helps us create, carve and improve how we deliver the care, and that's one of the things that I'm absolutely passionate about. So that's going to lead me on to a system that we have devised in Scotland, and it's called Care-Mnd. So I'd like to just introduce you to this. And over the next couple of days, you might see this being referred to quite a lot in some of the presentations from some of the Scottish team that we've got presenting. So it's just to give you a little bit of an understanding of what it is that we're doing for that. So just to give you an understanding of the scope of the MND problem that we have in Scotland, and a little bit about actually our infrastructure here. So we're, as you know, the northern part of the United Kingdom. Although we're a very small United Kingdom island, we have got separate laws, as you might be aware. We're going through Brexit just now. I'm not going to talk about that. I don't think even the UK knows what's going on there. But within Scotland, we have got quite a different healthcare system. And the healthcare system that we've got is it's broken up into what we call health boards. So there's 14 health boards that make up the whole of Scotland. And as you can see from the map here, I'll maybe just point to you that Scotland also has a couple of islands that are attached to us. So the most northerly island that we've got is the island of Shetland. Now, it's not actually just one island. There's, right, Moira. No, is Dorothy here yet? So Shetland Islands, sorry, is a cluster of around about, I think I'm going to hazard, about 27 islands. And we've actually got a patient with MND on the most northerly tip, right up there, which involves the nurse who's placed on Shetland to get a car, a ferry, and pretty much one day's journey, just to get to see that patient. And that patient is on non-invasive ventilation and also has gastrostomy feeding. So we also have the Western Isles over here, where you can get very good whisky, Isle of Skye, where we've got 2 patients on, and that in itself is quite a challenge for us to get to some of these remote places. So I want you just to bear that in mind with that. We've also got some of the other bigger regions that you'll be able to see. So Grampian up here, Aberdeen, the Granite City. Highland is a massive area, massive health board, right up from Thurso, John O'Groats, right down to here. And again, you've got all these little islands that you've got to get rowing boats and various other bits and bobs to get to. And there's always the haggis will get you if nothing else will. Tayside is Dundee, coming down into Dundee, and then coming down into what we call the Central Belt, where it's slightly more populated into Forth Valley, which is Stirling. Fife, which they class as a kingdom on its own, is sort of Kirkcaldy, Dundee, and then we've got a really big patch where we're situated just now called Greater Glasgow Health Board, which is one of the biggest health boards that we've got in Scotland, and also Ayrshire and Arran running right down where the bad weather's meant to hit tomorrow, Lanarkshire, the Scottish borders, which is just starting to tip onto where we border with England, and of course Dumfries and Galloway as well. Sorry, and Edinburgh is just in at this area here. So we've got 5.3 million population within that catchment area and 14 health boards that cover all the patients, even remotely onto the islands. Currently, just now, we've got 450 people living in Scotland with motor neuron disease. And there's 5 major universities, which is critical to the mix here, because when you place that into the UK equivalent, we've got more major universities situated in Scotland than there is per capita in the rest of the United Kingdom. So that means that we're challenged. A lot of the health boards and a lot of the big major hospitals are affiliated to those universities. So it means that we've got a very high academic standard and just a very high standard of clinical care as well that we produce. Nurses, doctors, speech and language therapists all come through those major universities. There's also 3 MND ALS charities in Scotland, and again, for the number of patients we've got living, that's exceptionally generous. MND Scotland, the Ewan MacDonald Centre, and the Doddy Weir Foundation. So we've got a bit of a unique investment that happened to us around about 2015, and just very quickly to touch on that. There was a very inspirational patient a few years ago called Gordon Aikman, who lived in Edinburgh, and he was very part of the Scottish Government. And at that time, he was diagnosed, and unfortunately, he died within the expected time frame of motor neuron disease. But what Gordon achieved was he actually challenged our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to say that the care of the clinical specialists in particular, at that time there was only 7 of us, wasn't good enough, and the fact that a charity, MND Scotland, funded us was even worse. So he directly publicly challenged her to say that the MND clinical specialists should be funded by Scottish Government. And a lot of people now to this day think that she's actually had a little bit of a bang on the head, because they say that she was led by her heart and not her head. So this is an absolutely unique one-off investment that she made to one single disease in Scotland, and she made it to motor neuron disease. And what she pledged was that regardless of whatever government comes into post, so as soon as she leaves, the next government must sustain this funding, but she will put £700,000 every year purely for the care of MND patients. That's not medical, nothing, that's the clinical specialist team. So with that, £700,000 has bought 16 clinical specialists. Most of them are over here today with us, and myself as a lead clinical specialist, and my profession is nursing. So as a nursing, we've then been challenged with how do we actually deliver equity across the 14 health boards to make sure that everybody, regardless of where you live, is exposed to the same clinical care. And also that we've got equity of care as well. That in itself is quite a challenge, but it's something that we're working very closely with third sector, and I'm directly responsible to the Chief Nursing Office, so again, we get kept a very close eye on what we're doing. So the responsibility of the national team is quite big. We have got that on our shoulders, that we need to deliver equity of care, we need to standardise our care, we need to make sure that we're all doing roughly the same thing. And the other day I was just kind of out having a think about this, and it's actually a big challenge of how do we get one of the bigger health boards such as Glasgow to do the same as one of the smaller health boards such as Orkney. And I kind of came up with the same, I was actually making my Christmas cake with my daughter, and she said to me, "Mum, why are you pouring the whiskey and the brandy in first? Surely you do that later on." And then my son said, "Well, why are you doing it that way? I would do it this way." And I kind of thought, we're all doing it similarly. The end result is the same. And I don't think we'll ever be able to get complete standardisation of care. But as long as we've got guidelines, areas where we're striving to achieve, there's always going to be localised ways of doing something, but our end result is to achieve the best possible outcome that we can for the people living with motor neuron disease. So also very helpfully around about 2016 came the launch of the NICE guidelines for MND care. And of course NICE is not Scottish, and of course Scotland and England, we sometimes have a little bit of we don't do things that way, but actually it was one of the things that we've at the beginning said, no, the NICE guidelines are amazing. We're not going to set about writing our own guidelines, but actually the 14 health boards all agreed that we would adopt the NICE guidelines, which made it much easier for us. So we all work to those standards. We therefore then set about thinking about how we could standardise that care. And again, so when we sit as a group around the table as nurse specialists and clinical specialists, we realised that we all did a little bit about the same, but actually some of us did slightly regional variations, which we know is okay, because the Christmas cake's going to turn out good, isn't it? But we then thought, well, we need to be able to start to audit, benchmark, and really just make sure that actually no health board is falling really below, and we want to be able to raise that standard even higher. One of the other aims that we want to do, and one of the big aims of the Scottish Government, is to deliver care in the community and care at home, and to reduce hospital admissions into the acute hospital sectors. So again, that was one of the challenges that we got given, is actually we've now invested very heavily in clinical specialists. So some of the clinical specialist teams might have one full-time equivalent to 20 patients, for example. So one of the things that we would hope to see is that those reductions of hospital admissions comes because we've got a stronger infrastructure at the coalface working with our patients. So how do we do that? So just to go back very quickly, I've kind of touched on a bit of this, but just to give you a little bit more of a history of change. In 1989, we developed in Scotland the very first MND register, and some of your countries have also followed that lead and have disease registries. So 1989 was the first MND register in the world, which we're very proud about. 2009, Scotland, the government initiated some neurological standards, and they gave us some crazy standards to work to. 2 working days to see a patient who's been diagnosed in that big geographical area. So we were falling at the first hurdle. We couldn't get out to see those patients in that time. 2014, there was an audit carried out actually by the Ewan MacDonald Centre, and what that realised, or what that identified, was that it was sporadic documentation. So nurses would keep some information, allied health professionals would keep something, the medical doctors would keep something else, and actually auditing all of our clinical care was really difficult, and what that called for was one standard unified document. 2015, I've told you about Nicola Sturgeon giving us the money, and we then said, well, we've got a great opportunity to try and do something. So what we did set about doing in 2016, with the help of one of the Chief Scientist Office PhD students, Danielle Layton, who will also be presenting, plus also the work of our team, was to develop a unified pro forma of care set against the 2016 national guidelines, which meant that every single health board was working from one document, and within that one document, we were asking very specific questions set against the NICE guidelines. In 2017, we launched Care-Mnd. So Care-Mnd stands for Clinical Audit Research and Evaluation Platform. It's a live digital platform that we've got, and it captures every living person in Scotland with motor neuron disease, which is why I can tell you today that we've actually got 435 cases. It's a comprehensive capture of clinical information and the clinical specialist team input into this at point of diagnosis. We include various different clinical benchmarks, which we've got captured from the NICE guidelines. We also capture disease classification, genetic analysis, and a full capture of the patient's journey from diagnosis right through to death. The platform also acts as a research interest register, which supports various observational and international studies. So at the point of diagnosis, the clinical specialist team will ask patients' consent to see if they would like to take part in any of our research studies. Now, it's optional for them to come in to this part of the platform, but what it does mean is that if somebody says, yes, we will happily take part in your research, the research team, which are based down at Edinburgh University, will then get in touch and give the patient information sheets, for example, for every individual study, and the patient then opts in or out into that. We've currently gotten over 91% of our patients have said yes, it would help with our research, which is incredible. And we've got a further 86% have given us a sample of their DNA. So we've got really good infrastructure and understanding of phenotypic and genotypic understanding of what's making up the MND population in Scotland. It also gives us an accurate incidence and prevalence of motor neuron disease. So we can be really quite specific per health board how many patients are at any one time. And for example, I can keep a very close eye on where, if we've got a spike in incidence in motor neuron disease, and one of the smaller health board areas, the NHS Borders, is over the last year and a half has doubled the number of patients. So we'll be starting to investigate why that is. So this is the landing page. We encourage our patients to come onto the landing page because, as you can see, there's some tabs there that say for patients. That's got very much specific information about our local teams, how they can get in touch. There's also information there about the research studies. We've put on there small 2-minute video clips with the researchers telling them exactly what the research studies involve, so that if people don't want to read an information sheet, they can hear about it. And we've also got some other various bits of information. We're exceptionally transparent, so all of our information consent forms are there for everybody to see and to download. And we've also got links to MND Scotland and also to the NICE guidelines, for example. There's a section for clinical professionals, which actually our team will then access into the register and into the database, and then there's some other various information. And this platform will only evolve as we evolve. So just to give you an example of what this looks like, it means, so if you can imagine this is replicated by 430 cases today. This is a dummy patient that we've got up. And I'll run through this very quickly. So we've got the patient demographics. We know that the green tab says that the patient's happy to take part in research. They've given us a sample of DNA. They've banked their voice. They've taken part in some of the other studies. So as well, at a touch of a hat, that either the clinical specialist team or I can see what that patient's been involved with. So from a clinical care point of view, it gives me help and advice for when I go back to either the Scottish Government or directors of nursing or medical directors about organisation of care. For example, if there is an increase in prevalence of motor neuron disease in their area, they need to know about that because they need to start to plan more services around that. It also gives us an idea about cognitive assessments on our patients, prognostic tools, saliva management, nutrition and respiration, AAC and end-of-life care are just some of the areas that we capture in the clinical care section. This is another landing page that you can see. So again, if you imagine behind every green tab is a layer of onions, as it were. There's more and more information that we capture behind all of these, and I can go into that in more detail if anybody wants to come back and speak to me about that. The audit that we take part is, we've got national-led audits from that data that we've captured, because as I've said, it's real. We've completely condensed the 2015 data onwards, so we've got very good, accurate information from 2015 onwards. But we've also got comparative audit data from 20 years previous, so we've been able to compare how we've improved in clinical standards of care over the last 20 years. And we're also able to provide local audits as per each health board, which helps service managers with local provision. So these are the list of some of the audits that we've carried out and some of the presentations that you'll be hearing over the symposium. We've been looking at national insertion of gastrostomy tubes, end-of-life care, riluzole prescription in Scotland, accident and emergency admissions in one health board area, the reason for unexplained admissions, cognition and respiratory, to name but a few. The research, so as I said before, we've got a portfolio of 5 studies just now involving cognition, DNA, observational, and that also includes post-mortem studies. As I've said, we've got 85% of DNA in our patients and 90% of research willing, which is incredible. We also are able to link studies retrospectively, so once a patient comes in and has post-mortem, we can look at their data over the course of their disease, and we can inform the researchers on how that patient's care has looked, and they can then say that they think that this person might have had a cognitive impairment. Does that match up with your notes? So we've got very good linking back. We are also able to accurately track all of our patients, and one of our aims over the next year is to bring clinical drug trials to Scotland. The evaluation part is that we deliver annual reports to every single health board every year, and they're benchmarked against the 2016 NICE guidelines. And we also encourage local teams to ask for their data back so they can look at their own service provision within local teams. So on behalf of the Scottish MND team, I'd like to wish you a very happy, healthy and good conference. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope it's a good conference for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Judy for that interesting presentation. 90% of patients research willing. That's fantastic. Does anybody have any questions for Judy? There are some roving mics around. If anybody would like to ask a question, please put your hand in the air. I actually have, we have one here. There we go.
Thank you for your presentation. A question, do you have all the names of all the patients in one central database, and are you allowed to access it?
Sorry, could you say that?
Are you allowed, do you have all the names of all the patients that living in Scotland in one database, and are you allowed to access all the
Yes,
data?
yeah. So the database is managed under Edinburgh University, under all of the regulations that we've got. It's securely accessed. We've got approvals from the 14 health boards to have that data. And because the clinical data is Audit, we are able to specifically look at that information. Anything with regards to research has got to come through a consenting process. So not only will the patient give consent to be part of the research, then they will then consent into every individual research study. For us to be able to give any information regarding, let's say, the number of cases who are, the number of people in Scotland who've got or are on non-invasive ventilation, for example, I can pull that data request. It's non-patient identifiable, so anybody asking that information will just get a gross number. So we remove anything patient identifiable from that. We're exceptionally well governed on security. But yeah, it's all in one database. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have one question, Judy. Something like this, it's obviously had its challenges,
Yeah.
I would imagine. Could you tell us a little bit more about how you've overcome them?
So I think so. The challenges are, you know, I think the big thing is that when the announcement from the government came in that we were going to double the numbers, it was exceptionally well met by the MND population and the consultants and doctors and teams throughout Scotland. The biggest challenge that I've had is actually from some of the other diseases that have said, well, we've got more incidence and prevalence, how come you're so special and you get all the infrastructure? But one of the things that we've been able to demonstrate is that this is a model that works. So for the Scottish Government to invest £700,000, we don't actually cost £700,000. We come in at slightly cheaper at £650,000. But you know, we're Scottish and we like to drive a good bargain. But £650,000 to have a disease that's organised and structured. So again, when I go to some of the big neurological meetings, we've got Parkinson's disease, MS, some of the other conditions represented, and people say, well, how many patients have you got diagnosed a year? How many have you got? What's the biggest problems? And people from a national Scottish-wide say, well, we don't really know what our problem is. And then when the government says, well, how are we going to fix that problem? They say, well, we don't know where we need to fix. Whereas very clearly we can say, we've got, this is X, Y, and Z. The big problem that we have got is delivering care in the community. The big infrastructure problem that we have got is that people want to be looked after at home, but actually we don't have that facility. We can't do 24-hour care. If we can, it's a big struggle and a big fight. So we can be very specific. But yes, you're always going to have political problems. And I think my best analogy is making the Christmas cake, is that we all do it slightly differently, but our end goal is there. We're a very tight clinical specialist team, and I have to say I've been very welcomed in every health board. But I also have to put a huge amount of credit for the success of this to the clinical specialists, so everybody that's named up there, because without them, we wouldn't be in the position that we're in. But I think we are very unique. So thank you to the team as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll move on to our next speaker now. Thank you.